All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Uhelski, and this is Use Your PM Tools from the Start. So a little bit about me. I've been a product manager for around 5 years. I've been lucky enough to work at a startup company and a larger enterprise. Right now, I'm working at DocuSign. And some fun facts about me. I'm a huge aviation nerd, and before lockdown, I used to do improv all around Chicago. There will be none in this presentation, though, unfortunately. All scripted. All right. So the thesis statement of the presentation is that many of the frameworks we use to get a job in product management should be used even more once we land that job. So the goal of this presentation is really to talk about some of the tools that I've used that have helped me be a more effective PM and hopefully can be helpful to you as well. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the product case interview in case some of you aren't familiar with it. And then we will go through these 3 rules and then conclude. So let's talk about the product case interview itself. So more and more commonly, this style of interview is becoming the gold standard as the last hill that you have to climb in your quest for a job in product management. And so, back in the day, you might get something like a whiteboarding exercise for a riddle or brain teaser like why are manhole covers round? And you'd have to sort of work that out and think through it. This has largely been phased out due to the lack of effectiveness of this style of interview as a predicator for success. And so enter the product case interview. This really involves large open-ended questions or situations, and these are posed to determine exactly how you think about problems, how you respond to them, and what would you be like to work with. So an example here is, how would you improve X product? Some other ones could be design product X, or should we enter this market given these competitors? So there are a ton of great resources covering how to answer these types of questions and frameworks around that. So instead of reinventing that wheel, what I want to talk about is when you read those articles and you learn those frameworks, that's great to land the product management job. But I find, at least with myself, that we often just forget about those things the minute that we're hired. And so I think there's a real opportunity here, and this is the goal of the presentation, is to sort of talk about what we can do with those techniques. It's more than just impressing an interviewer. I think that some of these frameworks can help us have more constructive conversations with our colleagues, and ultimately to build better products at the end of the day. So the framework I'll be using to talk about this is I'll talk a little bit about a rule and how that's used sort of specifically in the product case. And then I'll talk about the opportunity that we have to apply that once we're hired. So let's dive in. So the first rule, no matter what, summarize your conclusion. So this probably sounds incredibly obvious. And basically inside that interview, at the end of the working session, you should be taking some time to watch the clock and revisit the initial question and summarize your answer. So a summary could look like this. Hey, in conclusion, we should do this. It will increase the value of product Y, and we will measure it in this way. And that's great. That's definitely a very important part of your interview is making it exactly clear kind of what you want to do. In real life, however, at the ends of meetings and conversations that I've had, some of the questions that I have look a little bit different. A lot of times they're things like, what the hell are we doing next? Or what was the point of this meeting? Or everyone is nodding, but we're not on the same page at all. And so I'm screaming that in my head instead of a nice summary. And this isn't just me, talking crap about my colleagues. This is like literally stuff that I have done in meetings. I've not had a good summary at the end. And I'm sure that I've left many people confused at like, why did Kyle do that? And so the first takeaway is to always include a good conclusion. And this has three parts. And this is from I Got an Offer, which is a website that does a good job preparing you for these case interviews. They say a good conclusion has three things. You give a concrete recommendation, you highlight what the risks are, and you give clear next steps. And this could be at the end of a meeting, at an email. It could even be for a note, honestly, to yourself. But I think what these questions have, or these goals have of a good conclusion, is they make you think, and they make you answer those questions that might normally just sort of sit in the back of your mind. All right, rule number 2, let's move on. So if you realize you're heading down the wrong path, don't be afraid to walk yourself back. So again, for those of you who might not have done a case style interview, part of the process is that the interviewer will be slowly revealing more and more information about the case that you do. And in many cases, they will introduce changes or problems or blockers to the path that you're going on, right? And the goal here is they're trying to see how you respond in real life to these problems. Are you going to break down or get frustrated? Or are you going to, be able to really build on top of those? And so, some of these problems that they could introduce could be competitive responses, or leadership saying no, or budget constraints, or anything like that. And when this happens, you have two options. You can either keep sort of barreling down on that same path, or you can change your approach. Oftentimes, you're in the situation where it's most preferable to change your approach. And the reason is, a lot of times when you're talking and thinking at the same time during these interviews, and you may have just picked a product or a particular feature, and you're in a hole, and you know that it is the wrong thing that you said. And so getting out of that situation, that's exactly what you want to do. And so you change your approach. Having conducted some of these interviews, this can be a huge breath of fresh air. It's very refreshing to see somebody say, hey, given this new information, I think I'd like to change the approach that I have. In real life, I think it's a lot different. And I think it is more difficult by a lot. So I think that inside the walls of an interview, you feel that pressure very distinctly during that hour case. And so fight or flight begins to kick in, and you think, I have totally gone the wrong direction. And now you have this other idea for a different approach. And it appears almost like a savior that you can transition to. And in the moment, in that interview, it seems incredibly obvious that that is a possibility. However, in real life, I think you're actually it's more difficult because you're given the time and resources to think about things. So even though it is pressurized overall, instead of it being one little pressurized situation, we get the advantage usually, or in this case, the disadvantage of a lot of time and resources. And so I think given those time and resources, it's much easier to entrench ourselves in our ideas past what feels like the point of no return. And for those of you who don't believe me, my question would be, how many times have you found yourself in a come to Jesus meeting where you have 8 different stakeholders there, and the release is around the corner, and you finally, at the very last moment, totally change everything up? And I think it's those moments with pressure bearing down that we change our mind and we follow that new path. And I think the important part and the takeaway for the second one is that is always an option. We always have the option to retrace our steps if the approach is seeming wrong. It could be really early on or even in the middle. It doesn't have to be at the 11th hour. A different path is likely an option. And so we should all realize that that doesn't necessarily mean admitting defeat. It's just giving it a second, giving some space, and then finding a different approach. Okay, so on to the final rule here, which is start with a mission. So once you're hired into the role, it's of a product manager, it's really easy to want to roll your sleeves up and begin diving in on things like the backlog, upcoming releases, what your vision's going to be, because these are all really tangible things and they're right in front of you. And so you see the backlog, you start going through the tickets or what the releases are comprised of, and you inevitably begin thinking. That's a really good thing. But it's so easy to become mired in these details instead of taking a step back. And so this third rule, and I honestly think probably like one of the most important one, is instead of diving into those things, think about these two aspects. Number one, the company's mission, and number two, the business goals or the business KPIs that support that mission. Basically, these KPIs are the things that if they are met, that's how you know that this mission is being accomplished. And to show just a very quick example, I just took Tesla, for example. So their mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Now, certain KPIs, and I just grabbed these sort of quickly, could be increasing revenue by a certain amount, increasing vehicle production, maybe making that more efficient, or reducing delivery time to the consumer. And all of these three things help this mission move forward of accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. And these two aspects are so important because they really comprise the mandate of the product manager. And this mandate is by which you are empowered to make your decisions to all things related to priority and vision and what you can say no to. So as a new person coming into a new company, really the way I like to think of it is that the mission statement and the business goals are the constitution and you are the lawyer. So as smart as you might be, and as much success as you might have had in the past, no one's hiring you usually specifically just for your opinion. They're hiring you to craft a vision through the lens of this mission and supported by those business goals. So a few of the common decisions, for example, that we have to make that can come back to this are things like entering a new market or changing a sprint because an escalation is coming up or pivoting a pricing strategy. Each of these things, you don't need to necessarily reference, the front of the website and that mission of the sustainable energy, but in your head, how I think it's very useful to back up your thoughts is to say, how do the changes that we could make or the answers to these questions affect those KPIs and in turn affect the ability to succeed through that mission? So again, it's shying away from just going in on that opinion and going at it with something a bit more empirical. And this mandate is all powerful. It's extremely powerful, but there is one catch, and it's a huge catch, which is that everyone has to agree on what it is, on what the mission is. So when we're in a case interview, to kind of go back to that, getting agreement on the mission is pretty easy, right? You don't work for this company. You've probably done a little bit of research and you have the mission down. And so you only need one or two people to agree. And so when you're going through that case, you can say, look, your mission is making the transition to sustainable energy as fast as possible. And they will nod and you can continue. When you're hired in as a product manager, these discussions are a lot more spirited. So even if there is consistent language around the mission for a company, which by the way is not always a given, you'll often find through your conversations that there is either implicit or explicit disagreement around the mission at various levels of the organization. And this is totally expected. right? Because part of how we can interpret things has to do with our role in making those things happen. So for example, if you're talking to the design team versus the research team or engineers, that could yield different flavors or sometimes completely different takeaways on what that mission is. And so the task of getting agreement from all of these people, this might seem quite daunting, right? To say, okay, you're telling me I'm a new product manager at a company, and the first thing I need to do is to have all of these meetings and try to get everyone to agree. It might not be perfect, and you might not get that complete agreement. But the good news and the final takeaway is that I think early discussions around the mission are one of the best ways to check your understanding of how things work at your new company. And this includes not just what I've mentioned so far. So this isn't just the mission and the business goals, it's also the nuances of the product. It could be things like the market segments that you're in or where you want to go, competition, the sales motions, the life cycle of the product, everything. And so during your first couple of weeks somewhere, it's very easy to just schedule a bunch of one-on-ones and listen to your team members sort of talking through their thoughts on, every item that is important to them. But having them linked to the business goals can often really expose gaps and lead to deeper conversations. One example is, let's say you're in a conversation and, excuse me, one of the business KPIs is referrals, we'll just say. So you might say, hey, if we care so much about expanding through referrals, is there a reason why the top 3 items on the roadmap don't seem to be geared towards getting referrals? And this is a much more illuminating conversation than, for example, saying, yeah, the stuff on the roadmap right now, that's not the right stuff, and we need to work on this. And so in my experience, using the mission as an instigator for these conversations gets you up to speed faster, gives you your constitutional mandate, and really, really helps drive meaningful change and evaluate and understand sort of the forces in the market and the forces at your company. So in conclusion, why there will always be debate around the efficacy of the case interview, and it is definitely not perfect as a predictor of someone's success as a product manager. I do believe that some of the frameworks that we use can be very valuable outside the walls of the interview. These are not just tools, as I mentioned, just to help us hit the right points under pressure, but something that we can come back to every now and again to help us be more productive, to lower our ego, and to drive stronger visions, and ultimately to become better PMs and better people. And so I have to follow my rule here. The concrete recommendation I have is give these a try. See if they have an impact on your day-to-day. My highlighted risk is if you don't try them, you could potentially be missing out on some of this value, and maybe not having quite as useful conversations. And the clear next steps are, please let me know if any of these have been helpful. Maybe they're super obvious. I know they weren't to me, and especially if you have any valuable tools that I missed, I would love to know more. So please do that. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. You can reach me at Uhelski@gmail.com. I also have a website where I write about stuff like this. And like I said, I would love to hear everything, anything that you gain from this from y'all. So thank you very much and have a great day. All right.